At 30,000 feet, a wealthy CEO's young son began to cry. Not the usual fuss of a restless child, but deep, uncontrollable sobs filled with panic. He was deaf, trapped in silence, unable to explain what he needed. Around him, passengers turned away, uncomfortable, wishing the noise would stop. Everyone, that is, except one little girl. 7-year-old Adeline noticed what no one else did. She saw his hands trembling, his eyes pleading for help, and she understood. What happened next would connect two strangers in a way that neither silence nor sound could ever separate. But before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories reach. The crying tore through the cabin like an alarm. It wasn't the kind of sound people ignore. Heads turned, flight attendants exchanged nervous looks, and a few passengers sighed in frustration. In row 19, Dom and Trent woke with a start. Years as a pediatric therapist had trained him to recognize the difference between a tantrum and real distress. And this was the latter. Before he could react, his daughter was already moving. "Wait, Lynn!" he whispered urgently, but Adeline was halfway out of her seat, her small hands unbuckling with quick precision. "Adeline," he said sharply, the tone every parent uses when trouble is seconds away. But she didn't stop. Her purple sneakers padded softly up the aisle as she maneuvered past startled passengers. Daman followed, muttering apologies, heart racing. By the time he caught up, she'd already slipped past a flight attendant into first class, a place he clearly didn't belong in his wrinkled shirt and old khakis. And there, in the aisle, Adeline was kneeling beside the crying boy. Except now, the crying had stopped. The sudden silence was almost startling. The boy's tear-streaked face was calm now, his eyes locked on Adeline's hands as they moved gracefully through the air, signing. The boy hesitated. Then his own hands began to move too, forming shaky signs in reply. Next to him sat a woman who looked polished and powerful. Blonde hair tied back, flawless makeup, a tailored suit. But her expression told another story. Exhaustion, fear, and the fragile hope of a parent who'd been holding her breath for far too long. Daman stepped forward, ready to apologize. "I'm so sorry, she shouldn't have—" The woman raised her hand, stopping him. Her eyes never left Adeline. "Is she signing to him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Does she understand what he's saying?" Daman nodded quietly. The boy's movements were now slower, more relaxed. Then Adeline looked up at her father and said softly, "Daddy, he needs his blue blanket. He says his grandmother made it." Adeline signed, then translated softly. "It's in the silver case above. He says it smells like her, and he can't fly without it. He's scared because he can't find it." The woman's composure broke instantly. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. For a moment, Daman thought she might collapse. Instead, she jumped up so suddenly she nearly hit her head on the overhead bin. "His grandmother's blanket," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Of course. That's what he's been trying to tell me." "Why didn't I couldn't understand him." Daman reached up, easily pulling down the silver carry-on bag. Before he could even hand it to her, she had it unzipped. From inside, she pulled out a small blue blanket, hand-knitted, the kind that carries love in every thread. The boy's face changed the moment he saw it. His hands flew forward, clutching it tightly against his chest. He buried his face in the soft yarn, inhaling deeply as if breathing in comfort itself. Within seconds, the tension in his body melted away. His sobs stopped. The cabin grew still. Adeline began signing again. Slow, gentle movements, filled with care. The boy responded, his signs calmer now, his breathing steady. Daman watched her ask about the blanket, the patterns on it, the grandmother who had made it. He saw the boy's face light up, not just with relief, but with recognition, the kind that comes from being truly seen and understood. Across from them, the woman sank back into her seat. Her eyes glistened. "Thank you," she whispered. Then again, louder this time. "Thank you. I should have known what he needed. I've been learning sign language for 2 years, but when he gets upset like this, when everything spirals, I just can't reach him." Her voice cracked. I fail him. Daman knelt beside her. His voice was soft but steady. You're not failing him, he said. This is hard. Communication breaks down for all of us. Even Adeline has days when nothing makes sense. But you're here, you're learning, you care. That's what matters. The woman met his eyes, and for a second, the distance between strangers disappeared. There was a raw, unspoken understanding there, the shared ache of a parent trying their best. A flight attendant appeared, her smile polite but kind. Perhaps the children would be more comfortable if the young lady stayed up here for a while, she suggested. There's an open seat across the aisle, sir, if you'd like to sit nearby. Daman looked at Adeline. She was already showing the boy a new sign, her face glowing with excitement. If that's all right with you, he said to the woman. Please, she replied immediately. If she doesn't mind. Nolan hasn't been this calm since… She stopped, swallowing hard. Since his grandmother passed away 6 weeks ago. Her words lingered in the quiet air between them. Daman took the seat across the aisle. For the next 3 hours, he watched as his daughter worked quiet miracles. Adeline and Nolan signed stories, played little games, and laughed silently, their hands weaving a language of joy and healing. The woman, Nolan's mother, watched closely, trying to copy the shapes Adeline made. Daman could see her fingers moving, hesitant but hopeful, learning in real time from the two children. And for the first time in what felt like a long time, the air on that plane felt peaceful. Somewhere over Nevada, Daman caught the woman's eye. She offered a small, tired smile, the kind that carried both gratitude and sorrow. I'm Kendall, she said softly. Kendall Moore. Daman Trent, he replied. And that's Adeline. She's remarkable, Kendall said, watching the little girl teach Nolan a new sign. Daman smiled, pride and something deeper flickering behind his eyes. She is. Honestly, she teaches me more than I could ever teach her. Kendall nodded, her gaze lingering on her son. Nolan is my whole world, she said quietly. But sometimes I wonder if I'm the kind of parent he really needs. I think every parent feels that way, Daman answered. Whether their child hears or doesn't, we all question if we're enough. Kendall exhaled, a faint smile returning. Are you traveling for Thanksgiving? He recognized it as her gentle way of steering the conversation somewhere lighter. Yeah, he said. We're heading to San Francisco to visit my sister. She's been begging to see Adeline. It's been over a year. Adeline. It's been over a year. Kendall's tone softened. I had business in Chicago. Normally, I'd never bring Nolan along, but after my mother passed, she hesitated. I couldn't leave him. Not yet. The grief in her voice was raw, still fresh. As the plane began its descent, Adeline showed Nolan how to pop his ears safely, something that clearly scared him. When the plane finally touched down, Nolan turned to her, his small hands moving with precision. Thank you. He signed it 3 times. Daman felt a lump rise in his throat. The flight attendants were preparing for landing. So Adeline gave Nolan one last sign, something that made him smile, before returning to her seat. As they gathered their things, Kendall reached out and lightly touched Daman's arm. Could I get your contact information? She asked quickly, as if afraid she might lose her nerve. I'd like to thank you both properly. Maybe lunch while you're in San Francisco? Nolan would love to see Adeline again. And she hesitated. I'd like to talk more about communication. About everything. Daman paused, feeling that strange, unexplainable sense that this moment might matter more than he realized. But Adeline was already signing excitedly about seeing her new friend again, her hands flying so fast he had to tell her to slow down. He smiled, pulled a business card from his wallet, from the children's hospital where he worked, and wrote his cell number on the back. Sure, he said, handing it to Kendall. She held the card as if it were something precious. 3 days later, while walking through Golden Gate Park with his sister and Adeline, Daman's phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but he answered anyway. Mr. Trent, this is Kendall Moore. From the flight. Her voice was calm, but underneath it was a hint of something tender. I was wondering if you and Adeline might be free for lunch tomorrow. Nolan hasn't stopped talking about her. Well, signing about her. she added with a small laugh. It would mean a lot to him, to us. Damen looked over at Adeline. She was by the pond, feeding ducks with her aunt, her laughter light and free. For a moment he just watched her, that rare, unguarded joy on her face, since his wife, Jennifer, had died 4 years earlier. A sudden brain aneurysm during a morning jog that shattered their world. Damen had devoted himself to protecting moments like this. He remembered that morning too vividly. The police cars outside their home, the neighbor's trembling voice, the silence that followed. Adeline had stopped speaking entirely for 6 long months. No words, just tears and empty stares. Desperate to reach her, Damen had learned sign language, a way to talk without sound, to bridge a silence that felt endless. It became their shared language, their private world. Even after Adeline's voice returned, soft and hesitant, they never let go of that bond. It was how they'd survived. And now, watching her across the park, laughing again, teaching another child the same language that once healed her, Damen realized that somehow, through pain and loss, she had become the bridge for others too. "Tomorrow works," Damen said, his voice a little louder than intended. He caught himself and smiled. "What time and where?" The next day, they met at a quiet, family-friendly restaurant in downtown San Francisco. The kind of place with white tablecloths, real silverware, and a kid's menu printed on thick paper. Damen felt slightly underdressed in his usual khakis and button-down, but Adeline, dressed proudly in her favorite blue dress, made him feel like they belonged. Kendall looked different off the plane. Still composed, still elegant, but softer now. She wore dark jeans and a cozy sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Less the polished executive, more a mother trying to find her footing again. Nolan's face lit up the second he spotted Adeline. His hands flew through the air, signing with uncontainable excitement. Within moments, the two children were deep in conversation, their fingers moving in a rhythm all their own. Kendall smiled, then turned back to Damen. "I realized I was quite a mess on that flight," she said lightly, though her voice carried a hint of embarrassment. "I'm usually a lot more composed." "You were a mother with a child in distress," Damen replied gently. "That's not being messy. That's being human." Her expression softened. "My mother, Nolan's grandmother, passed away 6 weeks ago. Kidney failure. It was so sudden. She was the one who really understood him. She could calm him when I couldn't. She taught me sign language, pushed me to learn, but she had this patience, this intuition I'm still trying to find. I'm learning how to do it alone now." Over the next hour, the conversation unfolded easily, piece by piece. Between bites of pasta and salad, Kendall shared her story. She'd built a sustainable energy company from scratch, a multi-million-dollar business she ran almost single-handedly. Her husband, now ex-husband, had left when Nolan was 2. "He said it was too hard," she said quietly. "He told me he didn't sign up for this kind of life." As if Nolan was a problem instead of a person. She glanced at her son, who was now teaching Adeline the sign for dolphin. "So it's been me, Nolan, and my mom ever since. Until it wasn't." Damen found himself opening up too, the way people sometimes do when they recognize a shared kind of pain. He told her about Jennifer's death, Adeline's 6 months of silence, and how sign language became their bridge, the way back to each other when everything else had fallen apart. "I work with children at a hospital," he explained. "Pediatric occupational therapy. I help kids find ways to communicate with the world." But with Adeline, it wasn't just communication. It was survival. "Sign language saved us both." Kendall put down her fork and looked at him for a long moment. "I can buy Nolan almost anything," she said softly. "Therapists, technology, the best schools. But I can't buy him what Adeline gave him. She sees him. Not his deafness, not his difference. Just him." "You sound like a mother who loves her son," Damen said. "Money doesn't make that easier or harder. We're all just trying to do our best with what we've got." "But you've given us something priceless," Kendall insisted, a trace of frustration in her tone. "And I don't even know how to say thank you properly. I probably sound like—" She laughed nervously. "Like a CEO who's used to fixing everything with a check." Damen smiled, You sound like someone who cares. That's not out of touch. That's the opposite. Their lunch stretched on for nearly 3 hours. The kids were heartbroken when it was time to leave, so Kendall suggested meeting again in 2 days at Golden Gate Park. Damen agreed, watching Adeline's face light up with anticipation. That meeting turned into another, a trip to the Children's Museum before their flight home. And somewhere between shared stories, laughter, and signed conversations, it became clear that what began as a moment of chaos on an airplane had quietly grown into something lasting. A friendship built not through words, but through understanding. As they stood at the airport, preparing to part ways, Nolan clung to Adeline's hand, his face twisted with the sadness only a child could express. "This might sound crazy," Kendall said suddenly, words spilling out in a rush. "But would you consider staying in touch? Nolan needs this. He needs Adeline. They bring out the best in each other. Maybe—" She hesitated, her usual confidence slipping. "Maybe we could find a way to meet regularly?" Damien thought about the distance, the logistics, the inevitable complications. But then he looked at his daughter, smiling as she taught Nolan one last sign, promising silently that they'd meet again soon. "Yeah," he said finally. "Let's figure it out." What began as a simple promise turned into a routine. Monthly visits quickly became twice a month. Before long, it was every weekend, either Kendall and Nolan flying to Chicago or Damien and Adeline heading to San Francisco. Kendall covered the travel expenses without hesitation, insisting it was nothing compared to seeing her son truly thrive. Damien watched his daughter blossom in ways he hadn't seen since before her mother's death. She had found purpose again, teaching Nolan new signs, helping him navigate conversations with hearing kids, showing him that being deaf wasn't a limitation. In return, Nolan opened Adeline's world to the beauty of deaf culture, the sense of belonging, pride, and community she had never truly understood before. But something else was growing quietly. Too, something Damien tried hard not to name. He found himself anticipating the weekends not just for Adeline's sake, but for his own. He missed Kendall's voice, her laughter, her sharp yet thoughtful mind. Kendall fascinated him. She could shift effortlessly from talking about renewable energy policy to sharing a funny story about Nolan's latest mischief. She asked for his advice often, on Nolan's schooling, his development, even parenting in general, and she actually listened. She respected his perspective not just as a therapist, but as a father. And in those rare quiet moments, when the kids were off playing and the air between them softened, Damien would catch her looking at him with an expression he didn't dare interpret. 6 months later, his phone rang late at night. Adeline was asleep. Damien was at his kitchen table reviewing patient files when Kendall's name appeared on the screen. "I'm restructuring my company," she said without preamble, her voice tight with nerves. "I'm moving our secondary headquarters to Chicago. It means Nolan and I will be there at least a couple of weeks every month, maybe more." Damien froze, his heart stumbling. "That's a big move," he said carefully. "Nolan needs Adeline," she said quickly. "She's helped him connect with the hearing world in ways no therapy or technology ever could, and he's helped her rediscover joy. They're good for each other." "They are," Damien agreed softly. But Kendall's tone changed. It dropped lower, more uncertain. "It's not just that," she admitted. "Damien, I think I'm falling for you." He went still. "I know it's complicated," she went on. "Maybe I shouldn't even say this, but I can't keep pretending it's only about the kids. I look forward to seeing you. I think about you when you're not around. And I guess I just needed you to know that." She paused, her voice trembling. "If I'm wrong, if you don't feel the same, just tell me, and we can move on like before." "Kendall," Damien said quietly, his heart pounding as if trying to catch up to what was happening. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Really?" Kendall's voice was small, softer, more vulnerable than he had ever heard it. "Really?" Damien said. "I've been trying to find the right words for the past 2 months." There was a long silence. Then she whispered again. "Really?" "I kept telling myself I was imagining it," he confessed. That someone like you wouldn't be interested in someone like me. That life doesn't work that way. Someone like me? She repeated with a shaky laugh. Damien, you're the first person in years who's made me feel like I'm more than a CEO, more than a single mom, more than a walking bank account. You see me. Really see me. Do you know how rare that is? They talked until 2 in the morning, their words drifting from emotions to fears, from the past that shaped them to the future they both dared to imagine. It felt terrifying, and completely right. By the following autumn, 1 year after that fateful flight where their lives first collided at 30,000 feet, they had quietly become a family. Not officially, not yet, but in every way that mattered. Kendall bought a house in Chicago's northern suburbs, a warm, welcoming colonial with enough rooms for everyone and a backyard where the kids could chase fireflies. She kept her San Francisco place for work, but Chicago had become home. Their home. In that house, something extraordinary bloomed. It was a space where both spoken and signed languages flowed side by side, where Adeline's voice and Nolan's silence carried equal weight, where differences weren't just accepted, they were celebrated. Still, Damien worried sometimes. His job as a pediatric occupational therapist paid well enough, but nowhere near Kendall's level of success. He feared being seen as dependent, as if he'd somehow attached himself to her wealth. He feared losing his sense of self. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the kids dance through the twilight with jars of glowing fireflies, Kendall reached for his hand. "You gave me my son back," she said quietly. "You and Adeline showed me what it means to be a real family. You taught me that understanding matters more than control, that patience matters more than perfection. There's no price tag for that?" "None." He started to protest, but she shook her head gently. "No buts. I have money. You have compassion and wisdom, things I can't buy and desperately need. We both bring something essential. This isn't about money, Damien. It's about partnership. Can you accept that?" He didn't answer with words. He kissed her instead. And that said everything. Their love grew slowly, steady, grounded, and built on respect. Kendall brought drive, vision, and security. Damien brought calm, empathy, and a kind of emotional strength that helped her heal from years of guilt and self-blame. Together, they became something whole. One evening, they sat on the couch watching Adeline and Nolan act out a story in signs. Something about dolphins that could fly and astronauts who spoke underwater. Kendall leaned her head against Damien's shoulder, smiling softly. "My mother would have loved you," she said. "She always told me I needed someone who could see past the CEO, to the mother underneath. Someone who understood that my greatest achievement wasn't my company, but raising Nolan to be proud of who he is." Damien's throat tightened. "My wife would have loved seeing Adeline like this," he said quietly, using her voice, both spoken and signed, to bring light into someone else's life. Jennifer always said Adeline had a healer's heart. She was right. For the first time, they spoke of their lost loves without pain overtaking the moment. The grief was still there, soft, familiar, but now it lived beside something stronger, something whole, something like peace, beautiful. He would toddle through the living room, his tiny hands forming clumsy, joyful signs that made his older siblings cheer with pride. To Marcus, signing wasn't a skill. It was simply love in motion. The language his family used to say, "I see you." Sometimes, in the quiet moments after the kids had gone to bed, Damien and Kendall would sit together in the same spot where their story began, on the balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. The balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. The lights of Chicago shimmered across the water, and their reflections danced in the glass like ghosts of the lives they once lived separately. "Do you ever miss who we were before all this?" Kendall asked one night, her voice soft and reflective. Damien smiled faintly. "I miss her," he said, thinking of Jennifer, "but not who I was after I lost her. I think I was just surviving back then. You and Nolan, you gave me a reason to live again, to build something new." Kendall took his hand, squeezing gently. "And you gave me back my son," she whispered. "You showed me that love isn't about fixing, it's about understanding, about showing up, The sound of laughter drifted from Marcus's room, where Adeline and Nolan were whispering secrets inside through the cracked door. Damien chuckled. "Those two never sleep." Kendall leaned her head against his shoulder. "Let them have their magic. We owe everything to a moment just like that. A child refusing to sit still, listening to her heart instead of the rules." He nodded, emotion catching in his throat. "She changed everything." Outside, the night breeze stirred the leaves in the garden below, carrying with it the faint echo of children's laughter. A sound that once would have been painful, but now was a hymn of healing. Over the next few years, their foundation continued to grow. They built partnerships with hospitals, launched training programs for parents, and created scholarships for deaf students who wanted to become teachers or interpreters. Damien's research in pediatric therapy was published in journals across the country, while Kendall used her influence to advocate for accessibility policies at a national level. And yet, through all the success, their home remained grounded, full of warmth, messy breakfasts, and the universal chaos of family life. Adeline had taken to mentoring younger deaf children at the foundation. Nolan had joined the school robotics team, often integrating sign language-controlled tech into his projects. And little Marcus? He'd become the family comedian, the kind of child who made everyone laugh before breakfast and asked profound questions before bed. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset over the lake, Adeline turned to her parents and signed, "Do you ever think the world will be fully kind one day?" Damien looked at her for a long moment before responding, his hands moving gently. "Maybe not fully kind, but maybe kind enough. If people keep listening." Kendall smiled, her eyes glistening. "Kind enough," she echoed aloud, as Nolan nodded beside her. And in that moment, surrounded by the hum of life they had built, laughter, silence, signs, words, it was clear that this family had done something extraordinary. They hadn't just found each other. They'd built a world where sound and silence no longer divided, only deepened, the language of love. And it had all begun with a single act of compassion, high above the clouds when a little girl refused to stay in her seat because she could hear what no one else could, the sound of another heart in pain. On quiet evenings, when the chaos of 3 children finally settles into sleep, Damien and Kendall sometimes pull up the old security footage from that flight, a recording a kind passenger had taken and later sent to Kendall. She'd had it transferred onto a small silver thumb drive, the one she keeps in her jewelry box like a treasure. They'd watch as little Adeline unbuckled her seatbelt and marched up the aisle with that fierce, determined purpose only children have. They'd watch the moment her hands began to move, the first soft gestures of a bridge forming between 2 hearts, the moment Nolan's crying stopped, the moment 2 children found each other across the divide of sound and silence. And every time they watched, they were reminded that love is sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, sometimes spoken, sometimes signed, but always worth the courage it takes to reach across the aisle and say, in whatever language you know, "I see you. I hear you. You're not alone." The greatest miracles rarely announce themselves with trumpets or fanfare. They whisper, in the flutter of small hands forming signs in airplane aisles. They arrive, in the tears of a mother who finally feels understood. They live, in the laughter of children who find someone who speaks their language, whatever that language might be. Damien and Kendall's story reminds us that sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be, even if you're exhausted in seat 19 of a crowded flight, or desperate in first class with a crying child you can't quite reach. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person. One small, determined 7-year-old who refuses to look away when someone needs help. And sometimes, just sometimes, that single act of compassion becomes the first word in a love story that lasts a lifetime. If this story reminded you that kindness is a language everyone can speak, that understanding matters more than words, and that love finds a way even in the most unexpected places, then please, share this video. Share it with someone who needs to know that second chances exist, that broken families can become whole again, that children often see what adults miss when we're too tired, too scared, or too comfortable to leave our assigned seats. Subscribe to EverBell Stories for more tales that prove the world is still full of quiet magic, full of people brave enough to reach across divides, full of children who teach us how to be better humans, because in the end, we're all the same. We're all Adeline and Nolan. We're all Damien and Kendall. We're all just trying to find our way home, hoping someone will speak our language and praying that love is still possible, even after loss. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing in stories that matter. And thank you for being here. Until next time, remember, the most beautiful connections happen when we're brave enough to unbuckle our seatbelts and walk toward the crying instead of away from it.